Okay. So I wanted to start by giving you a little insight to how I do things when I prepare for teaching. On Saturdays, I get up around 4 and I take all my notes and all my pieces of literature or whatever, and I get it ready and I sit down and I prepare my message. Even if I've got it already written, I do it again because I like to have a fresh look. I like to have an idea of what I'm going to say, and I like to have a plan. So that being said, my daughter has been getting on me a little bit, not much, but asking me to give a name for my teachings. And so I'm just like, whatever, just name it whatever, just name it whatever. So I thought this morning I'll take some time and actually try to come up with a name for my teaching. So last week, if you know, I did name it. It was Abimelech and his brother Shechem. So I decided on Abimelech and his brother Shechem part 2. Now, like in a good sequel, I did come up with a little subtitle, Caught in the Brambles. So Abimelech and his brothers Shechem part 2, Caught in the Brambles. I wanted to give you a reminder a little bit of what I taught last week. Gideon's died. We're in Judges 9, starting at verse 1. But Gideon has died, and there seems to be this leadership void, at least in the thoughts of Abimelech. In the land, they are doing Baal Bereth worship. They are worshiping Baal Bereth. And Shechem is a city that is in between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. They come together, and in that valley, that's where Shechem is, and it sort of spreads out into like this little area. But it is in between, in that valley in between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. If you don't remember what Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal were, I'll write it on the board again. Maybe. Mount Ebal was the mountain where God had the people say the curses of what would happen. And Mount Ebal would have been on this side. And Mount Gerizim, they would have come down, and this would have been Shechem right here. Mount Gerizim is going to come into play today in our reading. So I wanted to remind you, Gerizim, blessings, curse. So in the days of Joshua, he read all the blessings on Mount Gerizim. He had people standing on each mountain, and the 6 tribes on one, 6 tribes on the other, and Mount Gerizim was where the blessings were placed, and Mount Ebal were where the curses were placed. So let's start at Judges 9, 1 through 4. Then Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, went to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and spoke with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Please speak in the hearing of all the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? This is that power struggle, again, that Abimelech sees. Remember that I am your own flesh and bone. And his mother's brothers spoke all these words concerning him in the hearing of all the men of Shechem. And their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, He is our brother. So they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Bereth, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. I want to give you a reminder that Abimelech is the illegitimate son of Gideon. His mother's father was from Shechem, and last week we discovered that Shechem was a refuge city given by Joshua to the Levites, more even the Kohathites of the Levites. So these were Levites in this city. The temple of Baal-berith was in Shechem. It was the center of Israel's worship at that time. So here we go. We have these group of people who are now the center of worship for Israel. And they say, oh, there's Abimelech. We can have both. We can have the center of worship and the center of our king, whatever you want to call it. Our political power is here too. Look at Shechem. What a bright shining star. So, as Abimelech sees this void, he wants to be king. I looked up this word, worthless men, and found something interesting. The word is rake, and it means worthless and empty. I wish I knew what the Hebrew letters, I wrote them in here, but I don't know what they are. But the first appearance of this word is in Genesis 37, 23 through 24. And I wanted to point it out because I think it's very interesting. And it gives us a little bit more insight to what's happening here. And we'll have more to do with our story as we go. So Genesis 37, 23 through 24. This is the first time this word is mentioned. And most of the time it's mentioned more like this as I read it. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. That's the word right there. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. When you think of men named as worthless, you sort of have an idea of that. But when you think of men as empty, it's a whole different thought in your head, isn't it? They're empty. They're void of purpose, integrity, character. These men have nothing to live for. So let's continue and see what happens with these empty men. We're going to be reading Judges 9, verses 5 through 6. Then he went to his father's house, this is Abimelech, at Orpha, and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. So we see that Abimelech has slaughtered Gideon's sons, all of them except Jotham, and of course himself. Beth Millo is mentioned here, and we really don't know where that is or what it is. But Beth Millo isn't mentioned anywhere else, but it means house of rampart. So, if you know what a rampart is, Craig, you know what a rampart is? Yes. Please share.
assuming talking about a place up on the wall around the city where the guards would stay, and it was actually a little bit more fortified than just the normal wall.
Right. So this would be like the path that people would walk on the wall of a castle or a walled city. So we don't know if this was a walled city near Shechem or if this was a castle within Shechem, because it says house of rampart. I tend to think it's more of like a castle. I believe that these 70 men, these raiders, as you will, worthless men. Sorry.
I'm ignoring.
Probably lived in this walled city because they wanted to be guarded because they knew how evil men could be. But it doesn't really give us much. That's more just a side note. I wanted to bring that up. But that's my guess, because as they mention the people of Beth Milo meeting with them, it makes me think that these people. I also wanted to point out, in my book it said terebinth tree, but in what I was reading earlier today, it says oak tree, and it's mentioned that he was pronounced king at the oak tree or the terebinth tree. The oak tree would have been a sign of strength and endurance. It would have been something that was very symbolic to them. Judges 9, 7 through 21, we're going to continue. Here.
Can I say something on that real quick?
Sure.
It says on mine, and see if it's different than what you said. It says beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem.
Yes.
So the likelihood is that was the the place of Asherah, kind of a
Correct.
thing, the consort. So they were doing it at the place of their gods.
Right.
Worship.
But the note of the oak tree I thought was with the pillar. So yeah. I'm pointing out.
What Craig said, we didn't hear.
Sorry.
It says the terebinth tree next to the pillar, so that would have been the Ashtaroth. That would have been their worship place, one of their places of worship outside of the temple. But I'm pointing out the oak tree because we're going to go into a parable of trees here, and Jotham is going to be sharing some of the things that parables, as you will, and also at the end he's going to give a blessing and curses. So this is pretty interesting. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim. Remember, that's the place of blessings. Mount Gerizim is where I've already talked about. Joshua had shared the blessings and the curses like Jehovah had them do. He went to Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and cried out. He said to them, "Listen to me, you men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Should I cease giving my oil with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You come and reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees?' Then the trees said to the vine, 'You come and reign over us.' But the vine said to them, 'Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?' Then all the trees said to the bramble, 'You come and reign over us.' And the bramble said to the trees, 'If in truth you anoint me as king over you, then come and take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon.'" Notice, The plants knew their identity. They were content with the job they were given. Abimelech's only identity was to be king. It was the only thing his father had given him, was his name. Let's continue on now. In Judges 9, verses 16 through 21. Now therefore, if you have acted in truth and in sincerity, making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as he deserves, for my father fought for you, risked his life, and delivered you out of the hand of Midian, but you have risen up against my father's house this day, and killed his 70 sons on one stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you have acted in truth and sincerity with Jerubbaal, with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. So that's actually the blessing. If you have done this, then rejoice. But if not, here's the curse. Let fire come from Abimelech and devour the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and devour Abimelech. And Jotham ran away and fled, and he went to Beer and dwelt there for the fear of Abimelech his brother. Beer is a place in the wilderness that had a oasis. It had a well, so it was a place that was well known. So he went there and to hide from his brother. I wanted to point out that Abimelech was like the worthless men. He had no identity. He didn't know who he was. And because of that, he could do horrendous things. I want us all to know that we can find our identity in Jehovah and in Yeshua his son. There are many verses about this. Jeremiah 29:1. For I know the plans I have for you, declares Jehovah, plans for good and not evil, to give you a future and a hope. Ephesians 2:10. For we are his workmanship, created in Yeshua Messiah for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. If your earthly father has not instilled in you an identity, our heavenly Father has. There's over 100 verses about this and finding your identity in Messiah, Yeshua, or Jehovah. But remember, adults, you can no longer place the blame on your parents, because you have to move on and know him. If you've had a tough childhood, I'm sorry. But now it is time to move past that and find your identity in Messiah. So we've seen him give the blessings and the curse on the Mount Gerizim. But I wanted to continue reading what happens in the rest of this chapter. And we can see the fulfillment of this curse. I'm going to be reading Judges 9:22 through the end of the chapter, which is 57. So it is a lot of reading. I'll try to make it exciting or whatever. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem who aided him in the killing of his brothers. So they want to wipe their hands clean of all the things they've done. We had nothing to do with this killing of the sons of Gideon. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along the way, and it was told to Abimelech. Now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they went out into the fields and gathered grapes from their vineyards and trod them, and made merry, and they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. So now Gaal's the next greatest flavor. So we're done with Abimelech, right? So then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? If only this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech." So he said to Abimelech, "Increase your army and come out." When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was aroused. He was a supporter of Abimelech. He was Abimelech's second in charge. And he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, "Take note, Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are, fortifying the city against you. Now, therefore, get up by the night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be, as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity." So Abimelech and all the people who were with him rose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. When Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." But Zebul said to him, "You're seeing shadows of the mountains," as if they were men. So Gaal spoke again and said, "See, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree." This is the place where he was announced as the king, the diviner's terebinth tree. And then Zebul said to him, "Where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him?' Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now." So Gaal went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him. And many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech dwelt at Aramah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his brothers, so that they would not dwell in Shechem. And it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. So he took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. Then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city and killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. Now, when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god of Berith, and it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Then Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, "What you've seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." So each of the people likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, and set the stronghold on fire above them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, died. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it. And he drew near to the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and he said, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed him." I think that's funny. It wasn't the woman that killed him. It was the big millstone she dropped on his head. Anyone could have thrown that over. So his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, every man to his place. As quickly as they had come, they were gone. They just dispersed. They were as lost as Abimelech was at the beginning. Once he was gone, they had no one to follow, and they just dispersed. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers, and all the evil men of Shechem God returned on their own heads, and on them came the curse of Jotham the son of Jerubbaal. I wanted to point this out here. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, verse 56, which he had done to his father. His father was no more. How had he done this to his father? Because he killed his 70 brothers, and what was going to be his going on. Fathers, I want to charge you. It is very important that we raise our children to know the ways of Jehovah. It is very important for us to lead them and guide them and give them an identity in who they are in Christ. But if you don't, adult children, men, women, you can't blame that. You have to move on, and you have to find that identity in Him now. They'll be steps ahead if you can give them that as they're young. But if you failed, that no longer is on you. If you have children, just make sure that they know where you stand, that they can trust and find true identity in Yeshua, no matter if they're a fig tree or the vine. Just remember to do what is asked of you by Him. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. And